2 hours ago, the Pentagon delivered a number to Congress that stopped several senior lawmakers mid-sentence. In the first 48 hours of Operation Epic Fury, before the second sunrise of the war, the United States military burned through $5.6 billion worth of munitions. Not over a week, not over a month. 48 hours. To place that figure in context, the entire annual defense budget of Australia is $48 billion. The United States spent roughly 12% of that in 2 days of opening salvos against Iran. The figure, confirmed by 3 U.S. officials to the Washington Post and corroborated by a congressional source to The Hill, arrived in congressional briefings on day 9 of the conflict. It was not voluntarily disclosed. It was extracted through congressional pressure. And the number that arrived in those classified briefings created something unusual on Capitol Hill: bipartisan alarm. The Trump administration's public posture has been confident throughout. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell told reporters, "The Defense Department has everything it needs to execute any mission at the time and place of the president's choosing and on any timeline." That statement was issued the same day the $5.6 billion figure leaked. What Parnell did not say, and what the briefings made clear, is that sustaining that capability requires tens of billions of dollars that Congress has not yet approved, a defense industry operating well below replenishment capacity, and a global reallocation of air defense systems that is quietly weakening America's defensive posture in regions far beyond the Middle East. The $5.6 billion figure reflects the cost of specific weapons categories, not general operational expenses. The opening 2 days of Operation Epic Fury were built around America's most expensive and most precise munitions inventory. Tomahawk cruise missiles, at approximately $2 million per unit, these formed the backbone of the opening strike package. Hundreds were fired in the first wave alone, each one a precision instrument guided by satellite, each one representing roughly the cost of operating a U.S. public school for a full academic year. THAAD interceptors, terminal high-altitude area defense missiles designed to defeat ballistic missiles in their terminal phase, cost between $11 million and $17 million per round. Iran launched over 500 ballistic missiles and approximately 2,000 drones from day one. Intercepting incoming threats at scale burns through THAAD inventory at a pace the defense industry has never been asked to replace at wartime speed. Advanced air-to-ground munitions, joint direct attack, munitions enhanced with precision guidance kits, GBU-57 massive ordnance, penetrators used against hardened underground nuclear sites, and laser-guided bombs across the range of strike packages account for the remainder. 4 days into the war, U.S. Central Command reported striking over 2,000 targets using more than 2,000 individual munitions. By day 11, that figure had reached more than 5,000 targets. The math on expenditure rates is not difficult to run. But here is the number that has not received sufficient attention. The New York Times, citing a separate Pentagon briefing to Congress, reported the first 7 days of the conflict cost approximately $6 billion in total. That means $5.6 billion, the first 2 days, represented the overwhelming majority of the entire first week's expenditure. The pace of consumption was front-loaded, and it was extraordinary. Before the first strike, on February 28th, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Caine had a private conversation with President Trump that multiple officials have since described to reporters. Caine's message was direct. A prolonged conflict in Iran would risk dangerously depleting America's stocks of precision weaponry. That warning did not come from nowhere. It came from a defense industrial base already stretched to near capacity by 3 years of weapons transfers to Ukraine, ongoing operations across at least 7 other active theaters, and a manufacturing ecosystem that simply cannot surge fast enough to replace what a modern high-tempo air campaign consumes. Mark Cancian, a weapons inventory expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, told the Washington Post that the pace of consumption reflects choices made in the operation's design. The opening wave prioritized the most expensive precision munitions: Tomahawks, THAAD interceptors, advanced standoff weapons, because those weapons minimize collateral damage and maximize penetration of hardened targets. But those weapons are also the ones with the longest production lead times and the smallest existing stockpiles. Cancian noted that the pivot the Pentagon announced last week, shifting away from precision munitions toward laser-guided bombs, would dramatically reduce per-strike cost from several $1,000,000 per round in some cases to as little as $100,000. The problem is that laser-guided bombs require closer proximity to targets, carry different risk profiles for pilots, and are less effective against the specific category of hardened underground facilities that represent Iran's remaining nuclear infrastructure. The strategic implication, the most militarily effective phase of the campaign, the precision strike phase, has already consumed resources that will take years to replace. What follows is necessarily a different kind of campaign, with different capabilities and different costs. Meanwhile, the reallocation decision has created vulnerabilities that are not theoretical. Parts of a THAAD system previously stationed in South Korea have been repositioned to the Middle East. Patriot interceptor batteries from across the Indo-Pacific have been redirected. Cancian's assessment was precise. The more THAADs and Patriots you shoot, the more risk you assume in the Indo-Pacific and in Ukraine. Those are the two theaters where American advanced air defense capability is considered most essential to deterrence of near-peer adversaries. Both are now marginally less defended than they were on February 27th. Within hours of the $5.6 billion figure reaching congressional staff, the question that dominated the secure briefing rooms was not whether to approve additional funding, it was how much and how fast. The Trump administration is expected to submit a supplemental defense spending request to Congress within days. According to Politico, the request is expected to reach $50 billion. Congressional aides familiar with preliminary discussions told Reuters that some officials believe even $50 billion is a low estimate. The Atlantic's Nancy Youssef, citing a congressional official, reported that the war has been running at approximately $1 billion per day. At that pace, which itself represents a significant deceleration from the $2.8 billion daily rate of the first 48 hours, a conflict lasting through September would cost the United States approximately $215 billion. For reference, the total cost of the Iraq War over 9 years was approximately $2 trillion. If current burn rates persist and the conflict extends to the upper end of some analysts' projections, the Iran operation could approach Iraq's annual expenditure within months, not years. The Center for American Progress, analyzing costs through day 4, including munitions, force repositioning, and the destruction of 3 F-15 fighter jets in a friendly fire incident involving Kuwait, each worth approximately $100 million according to Cancian, placed total costs at over $5 billion before the end of the first week. That estimate preceded the revelation of the full $5.6 billion munitions figure. The supplemental request is certain to face intense political friction. Democrats, who have so far been unable to pass any legislation to constrain the military operation, will use the funding debate as the primary legislative battlefield. A new Quinnipiac poll shows 53% of Americans oppose the military action against Iran, with only 40% in support. An additional 77% expect the conflict will result in a terrorist attack on U.S. soil. Those numbers do not describe a public prepared to absorb a $50 billion supplemental request without significant political consequence. The $5.6 billion figure did not enter a vacuum. It arrived in the same week that oil briefly touched $120 per barrel, the highest price since 2022, and the same week that 3 American F-15s were destroyed in a friendly fire incident. Financial markets, which had been oscillating on every presidential statement about the war's timeline, processed the munitions number as confirmation of something they had been pricing in partially. This conflict is expensive, it is consuming irreplaceable assets, and the fiscal mechanism to sustain it has not yet been secured. The US dollar weakened against major currencies in the days following the figure's disclosure. Treasury yields moved on concerns about emergency supplemental spending. Energy futures incorporated the compound risk of Strait of Hormuz disruption and an extended conflict timeline. Defense contractor stocks told a different story. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman, the manufacturers of the weapons being consumed at $5.6 billion per 2 days, moved sharply higher on the news. Trump met executives from 7 defense contractors the Friday before the figure was disclosed. The Pentagon's immediate public priority was replenishment. The irony embedded in that dynamic is worth pausing on. The weapons being consumed fastest are the ones with the longest production lead times. Raytheon produces approximately 300 Tomahawk cruise missiles per year under current contracts. The opening salvo of Operation Epic Fury consumed multiples of that annual production in 48 hours. Market optimism about defense contractor revenues is structurally rational. The gap between consumption and production capacity means years of guaranteed orders. But it does not resolve the immediate operational problem, which is that the United States military cannot replace what it has spent at the pace it spent it. The number that may prove most consequential in the domestic political calculus is not $5.6 billion. It is $1 billion per day. The ongoing operational cost, as reported by The Atlantic, set against an affordability crisis that was already the dominant economic concern for American households before the first missile was fired. Gas prices have risen sharply since the Strait of Hormuz effectively closed to commercial tanker traffic. Mortgage rates, already elevated, are responding to Treasury market pressure from anticipated supplemental spending. The Federal Reserve faces an environment where energy-driven inflation is rising simultaneously, with expectations of large-scale emergency defense expenditure, a combination its conventional tools are poorly equipped to address. The 53% opposition figure in the Quinnipiac poll is not primarily driven by anti-war sentiment in the abstract. It is driven by the concrete, the price at the pump, the uncertainty in markets, the sense that a conflict launched with no congressional authorization is now being paid for by ordinary Americans who were not consulted and who will receive a supplemental funding bill they did not vote for. A senior Republican senator, speaking anonymously to Politico, framed the political problem directly. We can explain a war, we cannot explain a $5.6 billion 2-day tab to constituents who cannot afford groceries and then ask them to approve $50 billion more. That is the domestic arithmetic of Operation Epic Fury that no military briefing addresses. The war has a price. The price is now public, and the public is paying it. 2 hours ago, most Americans knew the Iran war was expensive. Now, they know the number. $5.6 billion. 48 hours before the second sunrise. The Pentagon insists it has everything it needs. The supplemental request suggests otherwise. The stockpile warnings Caine delivered before the war began are now validated in real time by a consumption rate that exceeded pre-war planning assumptions by every measure. What the $5.6 billion figure reveals is not simply a cost. It reveals a rate, a pace, a trajectory. If the opening 2 days consumed $5.6 billion in precision munitions, and the war is now described by Hegseth as entering its most intense phase, and no congressional funding mechanism has yet been secured, then the gap between what the United States military is spending and what it can sustain is narrowing faster than any public statement from the Pentagon has acknowledged. The IRGC said Iran will decide when the war ends. The defense industry is saying something different, quietly, in the production schedules and order backlogs that now stretch years into the future. America will decide when the war ends, based partly on when the inventory runs out. 2 hours ago, that was a classified concern. Now it is a line item on a congressional briefing document. And the number on that document, $5.6 billion, 48 hours, is the most honest accounting of Operation Epic Fury's true cost that the American public has yet received.